Good morning and welcome to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. And now, Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
And welcome, everyone, to another edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. And Mother Nature is starting to strike back against Minnesota. After last Saturday, and I'll say this, I was at the state volleyball tournaments.
Right.
Weather was picture perfect. What, the 60s last Saturday?
Absolutely gorgeous out. Absolutely gorgeous.
And I'm sitting inside at the XL Energy Center. One of the rare times where I don't like sitting inside the XL Energy Center because it was so nice outside.
Right. Well, and I was reflecting last Saturday, of course, is when a year ago we got that gigantic snow.
Well, I remember that because
8 inches, whatever. But we were all out. You know, many people were out deer hunting. We got that sopping wet snow. Mm-hmm. And remember what happened last year? It stayed all winter long. It didn't disappear. And the interesting thing was the weekend before that, I was downtown Minneapolis, St. Paul for a big meeting, kind of a convention kind of meeting. The weekend before that, a year ago. And the restaurants were moving their tables and chairs back out. They'd put them away for the winter. But it was 80 degrees, and into the evening, it was still 75, so everybody wanted outdoor seating. Then the weekend that followed, we got that snowstorm, and then we got nothing but winter for that whole period of time.
Yeah.
So, are you wearing your long johns today?
I have them along just in case.
Yeah.
I never know where I'm going to get stranded.
Absolutely. Well, I don't think there'll be anybody stranded necessarily today, but I'll tell you, it does feel pretty wintry, but I did like your earlier forecast of having a nice Thanksgiving Day, because, boy, I like to get out and walk after that big meal.
I think a lot of people are looking forward to that if it does hold. Now, mind you, it's Saturday, and they're saying Thursday could be upper 40s, low 50s. So we all knock on wood and cross our fingers on that one.
My prediction, though, is, look out your window at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock, probably be 4 o'clock while there's still some light.
4 when the sun's still out.
There'll be a lot of families that want to go stretch their legs a little bit after that big Thanksgiving meal. What,
they don't just park it in front of the TV and watch football like I do each year?
I didn't say they're all going to be out in the streets, but a lot of them will be out. But a lot of them are going to be watching the football games for sure.
All right, well, let's get to the task at hand here. It's financial strategies. I guess we should probably talk about what's going on in the markets. And boy, before we get started with our topic for this week, let's talk about those markets. It's been almost seems like a record. We keep replaying the same thing. It's been a wild couple of weeks. Yep. You never know which way it's going to end up going each week. What can people do to help insulate themselves from some of this volatility that's out there?
It has been another wild week. The market, the Dow Jones lost like 2.9, so let's just say 3% approximately this last week. That's substantial. When you get a 3% decrease in the value of the stocks, that's significant. The broader market actually was down a bit more than that. So it was really a crazy week. And, if people are listening, they're like, well, gosh, last week, people were concerned with Greece and Italy, and this week it's Spain. And I have to tell, I'm going to warn people in advance of this upcoming week.
There might be more of this stuff coming.
Well, we got 2 big things this week. This is the week by Wednesday that the Super Committee is supposed to come up with their recommendations. Most people feel like they won't have it done. And if they don't have it done, that is going to create what I would call a mini crisis. And why is it a mini crisis? Well, the sequestration or the automatic cuts that are going to go into effect, they'll still have some time to actually jump in front of those and alter those along the way. It's a more difficult legal process for them to do it because the cuts become automatic. The bad thing is it'll make the U.S. government look like they're not really dealing seriously with the problem. And what has happened when you reflect backwards on these last few weeks and say, well, when the markets were really down and they were down over Greece, it was because it looked like Greece was not dealing seriously with the problem. When all of a sudden both Greece and Italy took serious steps to deal with their deficit problem.
Including running out one of their prime minister, the person in charge in Greece, right?
Yeah, basically changing, over their government, for gosh sakes. This is huge seriousness. Well, if we can't be serious enough to have this super committee come together in some kind of an agreement, if we're going to be stuck in this, really partisan politics kind of thing where there's no compromise, then the international markets, and we are in an international, market world. We have to be concerned with what the rest of the world thinks of us, and also what our domestic investors and the portfolio managers and the pension fund managers, what do they think about the confidence of not only the U.S. dollar but the U.S. markets, and can we politically deal with some of these things? So here's what could happen this upcoming week. First of all, it's a short trading week, and it's a light trading week. Lots of traders are on vacation. They're real people too.
What?
And they've taken this week off. So when you have light trading, then sometimes you get more volatility. The reason is because you don't have as many people, just use metaphorically, casting their votes in the market one way or the other. So if a light trading sometimes produces a greater volatility in the overall market. And we got this upcoming deal with, by Wednesday, the super committee is supposed to come up with a result. So as this week progresses, don't be surprised if we don't get some pretty big volatility. Now, if they come up with a great plan and they lay it out, the market's going to love that. I believe the market's going to love that. Now, all we need is something from Europe to come up and say we're really dealing, because the markets are very closely watching the interest rates that people are willing to pay on the bonds issued by Spain, Italy, and Greece. That's probably more information than people want to know, but the point is, how good is their credit?
Well, and we've seen that in the U.S. too, at the credit rating that got downgraded from AAA to AA+.
Right, exactly. So people are really watching closely how good is their credit and how good is the perceived credit from international investors. So you started with the question with, what should people do to provide some defensiveness?
We'll get back to it here.
Right,
yeah,
exactly. I'm going to loop you around, buddy. So here's the deal, is that we've been saying for weeks on end that if you have not put defense into your portfolio, at least sit down with a financial, professional, a consultant, an advisor, and have this conversation to say, do I have enough defense in my portfolio? And don't just go with the traditional style of defense of going to, cash reserves, of course, pay next to nothing, but there's some very good ways today where you can sit down and say, is there a way to protect part of this portfolio for me now and into the future? So have that conversation and make sure that you're talking with someone who really understands all, the current methods of creating defense, because if you don't have it, you might regret it. And people are we're very moment to moment, aren't we? So, for instance, when the markets were down dramatically in August, week after week, and people were just, scared to death, and then into September, they were looking at, how do I put some defense in their portfolio? How do they create that? Well, when the market started to come back, all of a sudden, they just, lost interest in defense. And you know what? The time to put defense in your portfolio is really now. And granted, we had a down week, but frankly, at 11,500, 600, 700, in that range, where the market is still relatively healthy to where we have been in the last 3 years, put some defense in the portfolio, but don't do anything crazy or overly dramatic that locks in any losses. Get yourself positioned right for the future, but with some defense. So, I'm passionate about this. Because,
you are.
Well, because, people are betting their retirement on this stuff, and it is such a sinking feeling when it doesn't work out. So when they start to create some defense and they say, okay, I've done what I can to protect the portfolio at the same time to get some growth, well, that's a pretty good feeling. You know that you've got as good a handle on it as you can really get. But if you're just sitting there back and making it wishful thinking and thinking, well, gosh, whatever happens, and I guess that's my future, you either are controlled or you take control, in the market, in most things in life. You either are controlled or you take control. The one way to take control and not be controlled is to really sit down, analyze where your investments are, what kind of earnings you're getting, and whether or not it fits for your risk tolerance, and do I have enough defense?
Very interesting.
Yep.
All right, let's get to the topic then for
Absolutely.
today.
I am delighted to have Cindy DeRuyter from DeRuyter Law with us here today, and Cindy is really going to walk us through some of the very basics of estate planning. And thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely delighted, because this is a topic that, when we started this show, Cindy, one of the things that we said was we're going to give people information about stuff that they should pay attention to, but might not be currently paying attention to it. So important stuff, so that along the path, if they choose to, follow some of the information and advice that we give here, that maybe they take some steps to improve their overall situation. So estate planning is one of those great big categories. I can't tell you how often it is. In my practice, I'll be sitting down with some clients or some new folks that came in for the free consultation, and one of the questions we ask them when it comes to a category we call leaving your legacy is, do you have wills? And how few people have taken that initial step. And I think as we educate them today, the more people know what it is that we're talking about, the more I think that they might say, maybe I ought to do something here. So let's start with the most basic thing, estate planning. What is an estate?
It's a great question. I get this question all the time. First of all, everybody has an estate. Even people who don't think they have an estate have an estate. Your estate is everything that you own. So it's things that people typically think of, like bank accounts and investments and that type of thing, but it goes beyond that. It's your furniture, your jewelry, your car, your home. Everything that you own is part of your estate.
So things that you may have collected along the way.
Absolutely.
Keepsakes that you might have inherited yourself, automobiles, all of these things. So yeah, to your point, everybody's got an estate. Your estate might be the shirt on your back.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or it might be, a combination of investments and other things, but everyone has one.
Yes.
Okay, so if we know that everybody's got one, then the next thing is give us a definition of estate planning and what's involved with estate planning.
Sure. So estate planning is really doing some planning now, sitting down and writing down what you would want to happen in the event of incapacity, or what you want to happen at your death. So it includes things, you mentioned wills, and it includes things like wills and trust instruments and healthcare directives and power of attorney and all these documents that you can prepare now that will provide a roadmap for your loved ones and your heirs when they need to be able to follow that roadmap. So, it can include things, very basic things like wills, like writing down what you want to happen to your stuff.
Yep.
But it can include some advanced planning through the use of trusts, which I think we're going to get into more next week.
Right, exactly.
Trusts to do all manner of things, but including one of the big ones is planning now to maybe avoid estate taxes or help lessen the impact of any potential estate taxes.
Right, and here's what I think. I think a lot of people think that estate planning is just for those people that have those big estates, when you're really starting us out by saying, okay, well, who needs this?
Absolutely.
And one of the things that we encounter in my practice and in many practices is young families with children. So say just a little bit about young why, if you've just got a newborn, why do you need a will?
It's hugely important to write a will and to designate who you would want to be the guardian for your young one or your any minor children in the event that something were to happen to the parents.
And here's what, folks. Here's to all our listeners. Well, my heirs will just figure it out. That's not the right answer, because that is where people get into great trouble. Loving families get into enormous tussles and end up sometimes actually hating each other because the directions aren't clear.
Right.
Why aren't the directions clear? Because that one important document is not in place the way it needs to be. So if we have young listeners that have new children, I urge you, run out this week honestly, folks, and go, meet with an attorney, get yourself a will so you designate who's going to take care of your kids if something happens to the both of you. Okay, it looks like we've got to take a break here, but we've got a bunch of great information coming up on estate planning with Cindy DeRuyter, so stay tuned. We're going to get into a lot of stuff about probate, joint tenancy, and a lot of great stuff coming up, so hang on.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
And we're back with Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Before we get back into our topic, we're talking about estate planning basics. But before we get back into that, we got a really good deal today for this week.
Yeah, we do. We're going to spend some money today because I really want people to spend some time and get a little bit educated about really estate planning in general. So there is a series called the Everything series, and this series is the Everything Wills and Estate Planning book, and it's really, really well written. And I was chatting with Cindy here before the show, and I said it kind of follows the topics of our show, because we're doing two-part series here, by the way. So we're doing the basics of estate planning.
Oh, what?
Doing the basics of estate planning here today, and then next week we're going to get into the more advanced estate planning with some trusts and things. So this particular book starts and really talks about everyone needs a plan, what are the plan prerequisites, the 5 steps of creating a plan. It is a really, really great to-do book that educates you about the very topic. So if what we're talking about today you're interested in, and you say, gosh, I'd like to have something written on this. Although it's a pretty big book, it's almost 300 pages. It's a fantastic little reference book that you don't have to sit down and read the whole darn thing. You might read 10 pages, when you first get it, and you might bring it back up and read another 20 or 30 on another time when you have a topic of interest. Very good reference, guys. It's called the Everything Wills and Estate Planning book. So here's the number you call. So if, get your pencils out, get your pens out. It is 1-855, that's a toll-free number, 1-855-346-4332. Just give us a call, give us name and phone number, name and address. It's nice to have phone number too, so we can check out the address, because we have had a little bit of confusion, and it's going to cost us a few bucks just to ship this thing out to you, so we want to make sure we get that right. But it is the free offer of the day, the Everything Wills and Estate Planning. Call us. Okay, now, Cindy, we started talking about basic estate planning. What is an estate? What's involved with estate planning? And, the word probate, people kind of almost get a chill through them when you use the word probate. So let's tell them what probate is, and let's really, there might be some myths about probate too, but what is probate, and what passes through probate?
Sure. So probate is really a court proceeding that is designed to kind of wind down an estate after somebody dies. So it involves filing a petition with the court system and having a personal representative or an executor appointed, and then it's that person's responsibility to do several things: to safeguard assets, distribute them per the terms of any will that may have been left, and paying creditors. Sometimes I think there's a misconception, you alluded to this, that
right.
People who have had a will prepared don't have to go through probate. That's actually not true. So if you think that, I want you to
Well, then the will is the probate document, isn't it?
It is the probate document.
It's what directs the probate court or the executor,
exactly,
right, to do what they're supposed to do.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I know that. I hear that a lot too. So I have a will. I'm not going through probate. And I'm like, well, you are.
Not necessarily. You may.
Well, that's right. That's a good point. Because, okay, so let's talk about who doesn't go through probate.
Sure. So in the state of Minnesota, anybody dying owning real estate in their name alone at the time of their death is going to have to go through probate no matter what else they own. Kind of flip side of that, anybody owning $50,000 or more in assets in their name alone at the time of death is going to have to go through probate, regardless of whether they own real estate. So it's really either one of those two things can throw you into probate court.
Okay, and if they go through probate without a will, what happens?
The state essentially writes the will for you.
Basically, they have rules,
Yep.
right?
Yep, there are what's referred to as the state intestacy statutes.
Right.
And if you die without a will, it's said that you died intestate. So then
Right.
these rules kick in, and the state's going to determine who gets your stuff. And it may not always be who you would want to get your stuff.
Well, it may not always be. I can't see how it could ever be.
Right.
I mean, honestly, I'm going to let the state decide who gets my stuff. That doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
So, again, one more really good reason to take a little tiny step and sit down and get this will put together.
Absolutely.
And even if it turns out to be just kind of a catch-all for other stuff, absolutely. So, and probate costs, I mean, people go through all of this, Cindy, because they're really trying to avoid the costs of probate.
Yes.
Can you give us just an average range? I know it depends a lot on the size of the state and the complexity, but...
It does. It's really hard to ballpark it. A very basic estate with, maybe a home and a few other assets, probably looking at a minimum of at least $1,500 and upwards from there.
Right.
So.
Okay, so let's say you had $1,500 of probate costs. One of the things that I'm going to jump ahead just for a minute because we're going to talk a lot about trusts really next week. But sometimes people spend $2,000, $1,000 on each trust, one for you, one for me, kind of thing. And they spend $2,000 to avoid $1,500. I mean, it doesn't always make sense to jump into these trusts to avoid probate.
There's more to it than that too, Scott. Probate is a very public proceeding. It's a very time-consuming proceeding. Whereas if you can do some planning ahead of time through trusts or other instruments, assets pass very quickly in most instances.
Okay, so aside, it's not just the cost issue, is what you're saying.
Correct.
You got the cost issue, but you also got, if you use some of these trusts, you can keep a lot more of that private. It doesn't have to be public as the probate process.
That's exactly right.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, Scott, we're talking about probate. As an advisor, how do you help people try and coordinate the probate versus the non-probate assets? Because I'm assuming there's a little bit of both sides, right?
Right, exactly. So, one of the things we when we're helping people establish their entire financial plan, their financial architecture, if you will, one of the things that we really, really pay attention to is who they want as beneficiaries of their policies, whether it's an investment contract or a life insurance contract, because they may come to us and say, well, gosh, I want, so-and-so to be the beneficiary of this policy, and then we have to help them understand then and have that conversation about, well, what does the rest of your estate plan, signal or direct so that we don't eventually skew it. Let me tell you one story that really, really demonstrates, I think, the point here. I had some clients years ago that said, well, we would like this couple had a brother who they trusted, and we would like him to be the beneficiary. And I said to them, why would you want this person who's the same age as you to be beneficiary? And they said, because he'll know what to do with it. And I said, I'm sorry, what do you mean he'll know what to do with it? Well, he's the executor of our state, so we are going to name him beneficiary so that he can then direct it to others. And I said, whoa, we've got a major, major problem here. And they said, why? Well, first of all, who is even going to know, other than maybe a conversation you had years ago with this person, where those dollars are going to go? Two, what if he dies before you do? Okay, and now what do? Reopen his estate? There's some complexity there. Three, he could receive these dollars and then have to actually legally gift the dollars, because they're now his. Okay, so let's say that's $100,000 and he's directed to give it to two other people. Then what we've got along that way then is we've got some gifting problems from him to these other people. So, just a really, really kind of complicated, wrought with problem kind of plan. Now, so we help them go back to their attorney, get that piece straightened out, and also get our beneficiaries aligned with what it is they want. Now, beneficiary forms, so for instance, if it's a life insurance contract or if it's any kind of contract that says payable on death, transfer on death, or named beneficiaries, Cindy, as you know, those don't go through probate.
Correct.
And so, and they are completely independent of the will. And so when people come to us, then and they start talking about how they want these beneficiaries and things set up. We got to make sure that it is coordinated in some fashion, because the will might try and equalize things along the way, and making sure that, well, gosh, I gave this asset or this farm or whatever to this child. How do I equalize the rest of what's going on in my estate? If they're not coordinated, you got a real mess, very frankly. So that's why we so enjoy having attorneys like Cindy in our network for a couple reasons. One is so that we can call and ask certain questions, but also so we can communicate with the client together and say, okay, here's how these two pieces put together. When I talk about financial architecture, I really do mean architecture. The pieces have to fit. So, that's the main thing, is to get a good understanding of what's in each bucket. And frankly, when you get into the retirement planning, then you start saying, well, I have these growth assets, I have these income assets. I'm going to use up the income assets. Well, they're designated for one area, and the growth assets are designated for another problem. Exactly. You got to, so I'd add one piece onto your question, Adam, and that is, in addition to coordinating, is monitoring. It is at some frequency, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'd like to have your opinion on that, Cindy. How often do they need to meet with you and others to make sure that these things are really set up right and stay right? So
makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I got a little long on that
one. You never do that. You're always on task.
So Cindy, to this point about joint tenancy or named beneficiary, if people get their investments, I get this all the time. Do they even need a will?
Again, going back to the beginning, I think everybody needs a will. I think before the break, we talked a little bit about parents who have minor children, and anybody with a minor child needs a will, even if it's a basic will. But to get more to your question, Scott, if somebody thinks they have just about everything in joint tenancy, or it's got a named beneficiary, there still may be other assets that you're going to want to direct through your will, even if it's just at a very basic level. Things, tangible personal property,
right.
Something that's really important to you. You've got jewelry or antiques or paintings that you want to make sure go to certain people. If you haven't done some planning and written that down ahead of time, that may not happen.
Okay, so I got one for you here.
Okay.
When I go over at Thanksgiving now to my mother-in-law's house, and I pick up any item in that house, on the bottom of that item, whether it's a vase or a lamp or whatever, somebody's name is written on it. Okay, now does that work?
Unofficially, yes, it probably will, but to make it more official, there is a form that can be used that accompanies a will.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but it's kind of creepy too, frankly. You pick up this lamp and okay, somebody's name is on there. Why is that name on there? Well, because they're supposed to get that thing. Have you ever, you've heard of this before, yeah. And in a way, I like it because it's very planful. It's like, hey, we're not going to have you guys come in and fight over the, the China hutch or whatever it is. So, okay, so that's not a bad idea. And also, I know that you also encourage people to make that list and attach it to the will, because, collections are difficult things. My dad had a collection of coins and guns and artifacts. And boy, I'll tell you what, there was a lot of communication that went on to get that stuff sorted out as to who's going to get it. And a lot of people do. Sit down and think about, what have I got? We have listeners that have tractors or cars or... You got to get it figured out, folks, because it's not that easy on the backside. It's much easier to do it up front. So we have got a lot more coming up with you on estate planning with Cindy DeRuyter, and we're going to be talking about some of the restrictions in the state of Minnesota. We're going to also talk about the size of people's estate and how much they can pass through. So hang on, we got more good stuff coming with Cindy DeRuyter on basic estate planning here today on Financial Strategies.
You're listening to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
Nearly 3 million members look to Thrivent Financial for Lutherans to help them achieve their financial goal. Nearly 3 million people know that Thrivent Financial is committed to excellence in financial services and caring for others. Get to know Thrivent Financial and the quality of products and services they can offer you. In Minnesota, you have a host of representatives to help you with your financial needs. Contact your local Thrivent representatives Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731 or call 1-855-346-4332. Registered representatives for securities offered through Thrivent Investment Management Incorporated, member FINRA and SIPC.
You're listening to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Well, we're talking about estate planning this week, but we got to get back to our deal of the day. It's a really good one, Scott.
Yeah, it is. It's the book called The Everything, Wills and Estate Planning Book. And this is an opportunity for people to do their homework just a little bit deeper, because I know a lot of people don't have the conversations that they need to, whether it is with loved ones or having an attorney start to draft up some of these documents, because it feels foreign to them. They feel like, gosh, I might be embarrassed because I won't even understand the jargon. And and Cindy, I know you do this, and we sure try and do this in my practices. We try and get the communication down to a level that people understand. It doesn't help to talk over their heads.
No.
At all. So, but one of the things that is helpful is if they do a little bit of pre-homework and start to understand a little bit about why do I need to, really establish a will or even a trust, and what is probate. And this book called The Everything, Wills and Estate Planning Book, that we're giving away for free today.
Free?
Free, absolutely free. And this is a great little book. So, and it's little. It's over.
I was going to say, that's not a little book. I've seen little books. That's not small.
It talks about the 5 steps of creating a plan, understanding the probate process, how to avoid probate, the parts of a will, decisions to include within the will. So really, if you're the kind who likes to do homework before these conversations, this is the book that you can get from us today. So you have to call 1-855. It's a toll-free number, I keep saying, 1-855-346-4332, and we will ship that out. Just give us your name and address. We'll ship that out to you hopefully early this week. And you know what? I'm not putting any limit on it. So,
what?
Yeah, no limit. So, gosh, if we get 100 calls, we're going to dig in our pockets pretty darn deep.
I would say so.
But we're going to do it. We're going to do it. So, we really feel strongly about this. So we're back with Cindy DeRuyter from DeRuyter Law.
And I should mention before we continue on, if anyone has a question for Cindy or Scott here, we are taking phone calls. So
absolutely.
We're willing to take those. 1-888-758-2575 is the phone number to call. That's the toll-free number, 1-888-758-2575. So if you got any questions about anything we're talking about here today, give us a call.
Right. And one more thing of information, not to overload our listeners here today, but one more thing is if they're interested in attending any of the financial seminars that we're conducting throughout the state, they can go to thrivent.com/find an event. And it'll come up with events, and just like any other kind of website, it'll say what location are you looking in, and they're going to give you all the events that are nearby, and that's thrivent.com/find an event. We are all about information. We're going to give it to you on the radio. We're going to give you the book. We're going to invite you to our seminars so that you can come and get educated on these important topics. So, okay, so Cindy, we were talking a minute ago before our break about, having all, what if you have all your assets in joint tenancy or named beneficiary, and you kind of walked us through that. Now, most of our listeners today are in the state of Minnesota, so are there any restrictions on the wills in the state of Minnesota?
There are. Good question. There are a couple things to be aware of. First of all, a will in Minnesota needs to be written. You can't just tell somebody what you want to do. You can tell them, but it's not going to fly. It's just not going to count for anything.
Yeah.
So to be valid in the state of Minnesota, it needs to be written. It can be what's referred to as a holographic will, and that's not a Star Trek.
I was going to say, is that like a hologram?
It's not. Essentially, that just means handwritten versus being typed. So that is valid. There are some other formalities that need to be followed. You need to be at least 18 years old. You need to be of sound mind. You need to have a couple of witnesses and all of those things. But probably
Minnesota actually requires a few more witnesses, I think, than some states. Because I think some states just one person witnesses, or in some states maybe, and maybe you don't even have to have a witness, but you have to make sure you have the proper number.
Right. Witnesses, all the requirements vary from state to state, but in Minnesota it is 2 witnesses.
2 witnesses, you plus 2, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. One of the kind of interesting questions when you talk about restrictions on wills in Minnesota, from time to time somebody may be having a spat with their spouse and say, well, hey, can I disinherit them on my will? I want to write them out. And in Minnesota, it's important to know you cannot do that.
Okay.
No matter how upset they make you, unless they've agreed to it ahead of time. For example,
so the spouse would have to sign off.
Correct, like a prenuptial or a postnuptial agreement.
Yeah.
But otherwise, even if you try to write them out of your will, they have the option to what's referred to as electing against the will.
Right.
And there are state laws in Minnesota that dictate what percentage of your estate they're entitled to.
Okay, and that there's some similarity there with qualified dollars. So with IRAs and 401ks, that in order for someone to name someone other than their spouse, I know we require, and I believe it's true in all states, but I know that we require that the spouse has to sign in order to not be the beneficiary. So it's kind of the same concept. You can't take your spouse off of those kinds of accounts either.
That's right. That's a protection for the spouse.
Right,
so.
right. Okay, sounds good. So we talked a minute ago, but let's get a little bit more into just say one more thing or a little bit more about what happens if somebody dies without a will.
Yep. So a little while ago I mentioned that's called dying intestate, and the state intestacy statutes would govern the distribution of your estate. And essentially, if you're married, your estate would go to your spouse. If you had children but you didn't have a spouse, your estate would go to your children. But beyond that, it gets very complicated. The state starts looking for other relatives. They would look for parents or siblings or cousins beyond that. And if they didn't find anybody, the state of Minnesota would essentially take your estate.
Right. And they actually become the owners of it if they can't find the other people to put it to.
Realistically, I don't know how often that happens. I think they're always some sort of distant relative. I mean, there's a chart.
Right. But that is the last resort, is that they assume it. So at least put your hunting buddy down.
Well, I always think even people who have who are charitably minded and want to make some charitable bequests, if you don't write it down and you don't put it in your will, that's not going to happen.
Absolutely. Great advice.
Well, Scott, we're talking about this. In addition to legal documents, what else should people do to make sure that their estate plan goes smoothly? We're trying to make sure everything goes to the right people and everything goes as smooth as possible.
Well, I would say communication is probably the number one thing that I would nominate along that line. And I have to tell you that 1 year in my practice, and I've always been working a lot with retirees, but I had 26 clients pass away in a single year.
Wow.
And it was just like, what? It was a crazy year. And so we were processing a lot of a transfer on death and really getting the accounts set up for the survivor, because in almost every one of these cases, there was a spouse that was surviving. And I reflected after that year about the cases that I felt like we had done a really good job on, and the cases that I thought we could have done a better job on. And here's what was the key difference: how much communication there was, first of all, with the spouse that was inheriting it. So here's an example: is in some families, One person takes care of the big financial decisions and manages the big money, if you will. I'm not talking the checkbook. I'm talking about makes the decisions about, do we go into an IRA? Are we going to invest in municipal bonds? All of those decisions. And the consequence of that is the other spouse often doesn't really know, where is our money invested, dear, kind of questions. And so one of the huge things there is to make sure that there's great communication. And so when I hear someone say, he or she, and I think guys are more guilty of this than the women are, when they say, well, she's not interested in this and I can't even get her to come to our meetings, I put my foot down and say, you have to. You absolutely have to, because first of all, guys, we all know this, she's likely to outlive you. And as she outlives you, then she's going to be managing this money. And it might be set up beautifully, but without either the relationship or with the knowledge of where it's at, it's a crisis. Think of this. Your spouse just lost you, and hopefully she's sad about that. It's not like, oh,
wait
gosh,
a minute,
finally got rid of it. No, but she's probably sad about that. Her world may be lost in many, many ways, and then she doesn't know where the money's at. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. You really need to spend the time, bring the spouse in. The next piece is family members. I really enjoy doing family meetings where we bring extended members of the family, or at least the executor, the personal representative of the estate, into the meetings to say, here's what mom and dad are doing, and mom and dad, you tell them why you're doing what you're doing. Because all of us all the listeners, I think, could name a situation where they've seen where complete, wonderful, loving families go to war after mom and dad pass on, because I don't really think mom intended this or dad intended this. Well, you know how you get those intentions really figured out? You have mom and dad while they're alive talk about it. So here's a couple situations, is that sometimes mom and dad really want to provide a lot for a charity. And that, in some cases, if you don't have a good wealth replacement strategy, means that the kids might get a little bit less. In other cases, you have a good wealth replacement strategy and mom and dad figure out how to, get life insurance or something else in place so that the kids still get, a full share of the deal. Okay, so let's say that's the situation. They come to, the settling of the estate and they're like, whoa. Mom and dad did this? Did they really? Or they start to ask the question, was there some influence? Was there some undue influence? Was one of my brothers or sisters telling mom and dad, why don't you do this? That's why you got to have that communication strategy. And then, okay, so you got the communication, and then what we talked about it earlier, and that's the coordination with your ownership. So where you have joint tenancy, where if the attorney, says, well, gosh, you got to have some trusts in here, then you have to be of help to transfer these dollars into the trust. One of the other things that we see all the time is they go and they do the estate planning. Those assets don't magically end up in the trust unless you take the time to transfer them from whatever ownership they're in into the trust ownership. That's absolutely huge. And then the succession planning with the money management. Well, what is succession planning with money management? It basically says that if there are things, especially things that need to be managed, and let's say, for instance, mom doesn't want to manage the money, then who's going to be the co-trustee, or who's going to help mom manage that money ongoing? Or if there are farms and you want the farms to continue to operate, or any other kind of real estate, who is going to be the co-trustee or co-manager of those dollars? Really, really big part of what we need to talk about. But communication is absolutely huge. And it's actually fun work, because it's fun to get to know the family members, because in the same way, when we lose mom or dad, one of the things I like to do when the family members come in to start signing paperwork to potentially transfer ownership to themselves or to others, when we get to know them in advance, this is a much, much easier process to say, okay, this is the plan that we put in place, now here's how we execute it. Any comments on that at all, Cindy?
No, I think you hit it spot on.
Okay, sounds good. So I know we've got another break, but we still have more to talk about. We're going to talk about the size of your estate and how that might make a difference as the kind of estate planning that you might want to do for yourself.
You're listening to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
And we're back here with Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. That phone number to call, again, if you want to have any questions here for Scott, for Cindy, you just give us a call.
Right. We'll answer them right now on the air.
Yep, we'll take care of that. 1-888-758-2575. Once again, 1-888-758-2575 is the phone number to call. If you've got any questions, give us a call. We're willing to take your questions, get a chance to talk with some pretty knowledgeable people about the whole thing.
and of course, our deal of the day, not to confuse people with giving them all these phone numbers, but we're giving away today the Everything Wills and Estate Planning book. And we're going to give away a pile of these books today. And I went over and priced it out, and it's I think it's $17.95 at Barnes and Noble, and we're going to give them away to folks for free by calling 1-855-346-4332. It's the Everything Wills and Estate Planning book. Just leave us a voicemail, and we'll send that out to you this week. So we have today on our show Cindy DeRuyter from DeRuyter Law. And Cindy, we've been talking a lot about how to get your estate plan set up. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about how large your estate can be before you need to worry about estate taxes.
Sure. And I'm going to talk about this at a very high level. I need to be very careful when I talk about taxes. I'm not an accountant.
Right.
I know just enough to be dangerous. But in Minnesota, under current law, any estate with less than $1 million would not be subject to estate taxes. Now, the federal level is $5 million, so there's a little bit of a disconnect where somebody may owe estate taxes to Minnesota, but not to the IRS.
It's a pretty big difference.
It's a huge difference. And even that $1 million level, Scott, very often I'll have people, I'll give them that number, and they'll say, oh, I'm not even close to $1 million.
And then you take the inventory.
Exactly.
And you find out.
Yeah, it's important to remember that is your entire estate. So that counts things like life insurance and your home and those retirement accounts, and anything that's payable to a beneficiary that's not handled through your will is still part of your taxable estate. So it's very, very easy to get to that $1 million level.
Right. I have the same experience where people say I'm not close, and we do the inventory, and they have $600,000, but they've forgotten about their IRA is being included, and they have a $300,000 life insurance contract. So, and people get that confused too, Cindy, because most people know that life insurance proceeds are generally paid out tax-free, but that's income tax-free.
Correct.
It's still, if you own it and if it's in your estate, it's going to be calculated as the size of the estate.
That's correct.
And of course, the $5 million is part of the Bush tax cut, or Bush. I guess they're the Bush tax cuts, and then that will, if Congress doesn't do anything, will expire at the end of 2012, and 2013 goes back to
$1 million.
$1 million, exactly. So things are, the landscape is changing there. I wouldn't sit back too easy on this one. So I'm going to jump ahead here to what would you consider, Cindy, to be the most common mistakes people do when they when they're doing an estate plan?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to something that you talked about, Scott. It's really coordinating your overall estate and having those discussions and understanding that some of your assets aren't handled through your will, but you still need to plan for them. So again, anything with the beneficiary designation, it's really important to look at those periodically, make sure they're doing what you want them to do, and make sure that that's coordinating with your overall estate, so that you don't have things out of balance unintentionally.
Right. And let me just add a quick story onto that one, because this happened to me actually this spring, where we were trying to do a review on a simple life insurance contract with a client that I had never met with. And it didn't seem important to that client to get together and do this review. And we'd mentioned, well, if nothing else, let's at least make sure we have the beneficiaries signed up. Because a lot of people out there are walking around with a life insurance policy that their mom and dad took out for them when they may have been actually infants.
Right.
That is not uncommon. And so this looked very much like that because of the date of the issue. And finally, one day, we were able to get a hold of this client, or someone picked up the phone number. It was his cell phone, and it was his spouse that answered the phone. And we said we were trying to get a hold of him and set up this appointment and have this meeting. And this guy was 45 years old approximately. And she said, well, he died. And so when we started working with her on settling the estate, guess who was the beneficiary of the life insurance contract that mom and dad took out for their child as an infant? They were. Okay, now, not only were mom and dad the beneficiaries and not the spouse, but mom and dad were deceased.
Oh, boy.
So it just, now, there's only a hair of good news on this one, and it's not very good news, and the hair of good news was that there was contingent beneficiaries set up, but that was brothers and sisters, not a spouse, because,
Right.
you know, this young man, when he was an infant, had no foresight of getting married, nor did the parents, so there was no spouse named. So the consequence is that those dollars went to the wrong place. So part of your estate plan is just make sure you've got this life insurance stuff set up. I find it with divorcees too, where sometimes a divorce decree says who, in fact, they have to have as a beneficiary for a period of time, and sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people say, whoa, my ex-wife is beneficiary of my life insurance policy?
Happens all
Well,
the
hey,
time.
it happens all the time. You've got to pay attention to this stuff. And, you know, and not just people with that kind of drama in their lives, but also, you know, people who just want to keep things, you know, basically up to speed. So we talked about the common mistakes, and you know, is there anything else on the trust side of this that we want to make sure that we're going to watch out for?
Yeah, and we'll talk more about this next week too. But and you alluded to this already too, Scott. But creating a trust and then not funding it is very common, and it's also one of the worst things you can do. You pay $2,000 to have a trust created, but you don't actually put anything into the trust. You suddenly have a very expensive few pieces of paper.
Right. And real quickly, Cindy, I know we're going to get into this a lot more next week, but how does gifting come into play in your mind with the overall estate plan?
Yeah, it's gifting is very often used as a method to try to remove assets from the taxable estate. So a few minutes ago we talked a little bit about estate taxes, and gifting is one method of doing that. So there's some gifting that can be done during the lifetime. There's a $13,000 annual gift that can be made to any number of people.
Right.
And if you're married, you and your spouse can each gift $13,000
Now
to
we're
any
up to
number
26,
of people.
so we're
Yep.
we're talking some real numbers with some, you know, with some real heirs, and you can do it
Absolutely.
every year, and that's just without filing a gift tax return.
Exactly. That's without the gift tax return. You can go beyond that, and you can tap into the the lifetime unified estate tax or gift tax credit,
Okay.
which that's the $5 million that I talked about a little while ago for the federal estate tax.
And the $1
same pot
million
of money. Yep, you can
and-
tap into it
Right.
during your lifetime for gifts.
So if you went over 13,000, doesn't mean you necessarily are going to pay tax on it at the gift tax at this point in time, but you're going to
Correct.
get into different territory.
Absolutely.
And then that kind of gets captured for later.
Yep.
But sometimes even that makes sense, doesn't it? Because
It does.
especially if you have growing assets that you're like, gosh, let's get the appreciating assets or something gifted out. But the number one thing that we find is people always want to make sure that they have enough for themselves first. And that's why I so tightly link this with retirement planning.
Yes.
Because, and you know, we use the metaphor, it may be overused, but when you're on an airplane and you get the flight attendant gives you the little spiel, if you will, and the spiel says that in the event that the cabin becomes depressurized, put your oxygen mask on first. And, you know, frankly, that's all about making sure that you're not a victim.
That's
And,
right.
and a lot of people, you know, have got this stuff on their minds that they'd like to do, but they want to make sure they're taken care of first. Because the number one question people are asking about retirement is, do I have enough and will my money last? And we want to make sure that, so these things are very, very tightly integrated.
They
That's why it's important that people sit down with a financial professional. And in all of our listening areas, by the way, we have financial professionals with Thrivent that would be happy to give a free consultation to any of the folks that call. So they can either call the local number or they can call that number that we've been giving out for the free book. So some of the things that we have hope our listeners learned today. Okay, and what would you say, Cindy, are the things that you hope that they take away from today's show?
Yep. Top number one thing is remember that you have an estate, even if you don't think you do, and you need to do some level of estate planning. So spend some time, find an attorney in your area that you're comfortable with, sit down, do some planning to give your family that roadmap.
Absolutely, and don't put it off, because people have, all these intentions and say, yeah, I've been intending to do it, but I haven't got to it. Now, and I hope this is fair to ask you here on air, but don't most attorneys package the wills with the power of attorney and maybe even a medical directive now?
Yes, I think most attorneys do that today. Yep.
Yeah, so get the whole package done. Don't go in and just get part of it done. Because I ask a lot of people, do you have, you have wills? Yes. Do you have power of attorneys? Gosh, I don't think so. Well, that's a document. We'll talk, I think, a little bit more next week about that you're going to need in the event that you might get incapacitated.
Yep.
And boy, I'll tell you what, if that happens and you got to sell some real estate or you got to do something, you've got to have that document in place as well. And the last thing is, absolutely, if you've got kids, get that will written so that if something does happen to the both of you, you have designated who's going to take care of your kids. That's
very, very
really,
important.
really important. Yeah. So, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us here today.
You're welcome.
And I really appreciate the information that you're sharing with our listeners. And I'm going to say one more time here that if people want to call in and get this great little book called the Everything Wills and Estate Planning Book, we're going to send it to them for free. And it is at 1-855-346-4332. And I hope I don't make a huge mistake by saying that we're going to do unlimited. But folks, you can call in and we're going to send that book out to you this week. Thanks so much, Cindy, for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed the past hour of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. Join us again next week for Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell on KMRS Morris.